Hey everyone, my name is Charlie and welcome to Fully Equipped. Chapters 11 and 12 were talking a lot about God's judgment on the Jewish religious leaders. Now, in chapter 13, Jesus begins to talk about the end times and what will come before Judgment Day. And then, beginning in chapter 14, we read the narrative of Jesus' death and resurrection. So this chapter is kind of the bridge between these two topics, which highlights that Jesus' opposition will be judged. The point of this chapter is to highlight that those who follow Jesus must be prepared for suffering, and they need to trust in God. In the first part of this chapter, Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. This ended up happening in 70 AD when Titus destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem. A big part of why Jesus prophesies this is because the people have failed to recognize him as the Messiah and Lord. Also, the destruction of the temple makes way for the new temple to come in through believers. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. He lives within us. Then we come to a big chunk where Jesus is on the Mount of Olives and he's talking to some of the disciples about the signs of the end times. As you read through this section, keep in the back of your mind the purpose behind this book. Remember that Jesus is talking to his disciples, who think that Jesus has come to bring in an earthly kingdom and save them from persecution. And the Gentile Christians who are reading Mark's gospel are possibly enduring persecution around them for their faith. So this section is here to remind readers to be prepared for Jesus' return, to highlight that persecution and suffering are often a part of faith, and to call people to trust in the Messiah. This section isn't supposed to make you feel afraid, and it's not supposed to fuel conspiracy theories. It's a reminder to persevere. Jesus warns about a few things that will happen before the judgment comes. Some will come and lead others astray. There will be wars, earthquakes, famine, and that's just the beginning. Jesus calls these the birth pains to show that these things will only become more common and more intense as we get closer to the arrival of Judgment Day. So why is Jesus telling them this? And how are we supposed to respond to this? Are we in the end times? If you look up the list of wars happening right now, there are a lot. Myanmar, Russia and Ukraine, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Mexico, there's a lot. Major earthquakes happen once a month around the world. And we're currently in a global food crisis. Countries like Syria, Sudan, and Haiti are all experiencing famines right now. So is Jesus going to return on Wednesday? If you think about it, wars, earthquakes, and famines have been happening from the moment Jesus ascended to heaven all the way up until today. We always need to be prepared because he could return today, or it could be 1,000 years from now. We don't know. But all of these signs are supposed to point us to the fact that Jesus will return again one day, and that we need to be prepared for that. We need to be going out and spreading the gospel and growing in our faith and loving our neighbor, because Jesus will return again, and we want to be people who are excited and waiting for that, not people who are lazy and distracted by other earthly pleasures. Jesus also warns about persecution and troubles to arise for his disciples as a result of their faith. He calls them to be prepared and to trust in the Holy Spirit's guidance when this happens. Jesus' disciples were expecting Jesus to save them from persecution, and now he's promising that they can expect beatings, rejection, and death from even their own family members. They will be hated by people. But this should drive them to continue to preach, to continue to serve and to love, because at the end, salvation will come, and they will receive a great reward. Sometimes it's easy to think that that kind of life, evangelism, going to hard places, putting ourselves in positions where we will receive rejection, that kind of life isn't for us. That's for those other people who have lots of faith and live that kind of life. We don't want to suffer, we want to live quiet, easy lives. Never telling anyone about Jesus because what if they don't like us? But if Jesus himself suffered rejection and even death for the sake of his Father's glory, what makes us think that we're above doing the same? This isn't to say that I believe God is calling every believer to go live in North Korea and preach the gospel and die for their faith. But God is calling every believer to be obedient and to do something with what they've been given. Spend some time asking him what he wants you to do, and then go and do it. Then Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation. There are different interpretations about what this means, and it comes from a prophecy in Daniel 9. One understanding is that Jesus is talking about two things. The first part is how the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD. The second part has a fulfillment in the last days, where there will be idolatry of the Antichrist. We'll get to this more in later books, but the Antichrist is an evil, false prophet who will oppose Jesus and his people in the last days. The point of this part is to highlight that people will try and lead believers astray. We can see this all around us today. Think about Mormonism, for example. On the surface, they believe in Jesus too, but they also believe that people can become gods in heaven. They believe that Jesus inherits his godhood from the Father, not that he's equally God as well. They follow the teachings of a man who lived in the 1800s and give the Book of Mormon more weight than the Bible. There are many confused ideas in Mormonism, and though it's considered a branch of Christianity, it's not at all. And there are something like 17 million Mormons out there. Believers need to be on their guard and not putting their faith in anything but Jesus. Then Jesus talks about when he will return again, the second coming. Lots of cosmic events will happen, like the sun going dark and the stars falling. Of course, there are many interpretations of what this means as well, but remember the point. Jesus is coming again to establish his kingdom. If you're a believer, this section should fill you with excitement. Jesus is coming, and he's going to gather you to be with him. That's what we hope in. No more persecution, no more rejection, no more fear and trials and pain. Jesus is coming. Then we're back talking about fig trees again. Jesus says that as a fig tree's leaves show that summer is coming, so do these signs show that his prophecies will be fulfilled. When he says that this generation will see these things take place, he could be talking about many things. Maybe the destruction of Jerusalem, or some future generation, or something else. But the point is that believers need to be prepared and trust in his unchanging word. The final section is how Jesus says that nobody knows when he will come again, not even himself. When Jesus says this, he's probably referring to himself as his human incarnate form on earth. It's kind of confusing because Jesus was fully God and fully man. As a human, Jesus didn't know when that time was. But as God, he does know because God knows all things. So we don't really understand how Jesus can have limited knowledge and also unlimited knowledge at the same time. One suggestion is that he lived on his human knowledge, but could bring to mind his infinite knowledge when he needed to. It's confusing, but remember the point. Be prepared. We're not supposed to make speculations and theories about when that time is. Instead, we're supposed to live as if Jesus is coming tomorrow, always. How does this equip us? What does it look like to live as if Jesus is coming tomorrow? It changes our focus. Things like pursuing wealth, status, the newest phone, a fancy car, or a bigger house don't really matter anymore. Think about what you would do if you knew for certain that Jesus was coming tomorrow. Would you go and buy a new outfit and spend the whole day scrolling Instagram? Or would you call everyone you know who doesn't know Jesus and tell them the good news? This is just an illustration, and I'm not saying you can't do fun things. But our focus needs to be God, obedience to him, and faith in him. We should be eagerly anticipating that day, not filled with dread or fear that we won't be married or have traveled the world by then. Let's be people who live each day as if Jesus is coming tomorrow, and trust that he will guide us along our journey to that day.